Imagine the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople, the heart of the Ottoman Empire. The year is 1623. The grand celebrations for the wedding of Princess Fatma Sultan, the beloved daughter of a powerful sultan, have just ended. The air, once thick with the sounds of music and feasting, has fallen into a deep, watchful silence, broken only by the soft footsteps of guards on marble floors and the gentle whisper of the Bosphorus breeze through the palace gardens. It is a night that is supposed to symbolize joy, the forging of a powerful new alliance, the beginning of a new life for a royal princess. Then, from the depths of the imperial harem, a sound shatters the tranquility. It is not a cry of passion or celebration. It is a scream, a single piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated terror that slices through the palace's opulent silence like a blade. It is the sound of a spirit being broken, an agony so profound that it echoes through the gilded corridors and makes even the most battle-hardened Janissary guards flinch. The scream belongs to Princess Fatma, a girl of royal blood, celebrated for her intelligence and beauty, who is, at this very moment, in her lavishly decorated nuptial chamber. This was her wedding night, an event meticulously planned for years. So what could possibly be happening behind those closed doors that could wrench such a sound from a princess? What horrific ritual, hidden from public view and censored from official histories for centuries, could transform a night of supposed bliss into a moment of such profound suffering? To find the answer, we must pull back the silken curtains of the Ottoman court and uncover a dark and systematic secret. A sacred education designed not to prepare a princess for marriage, but to condition her for a terrifying ordeal. What did they do to these royal women, and why was their wedding night so feared? To the outside world, and even to many within its own borders, the life of an Ottoman princess was the stuff of fairy tales. They were born into unimaginable wealth, housed in the most magnificent palaces on earth, and draped in silks and jewels from the farthest corners of the empire. They were the daughters and sisters of the Sultan, the shadow of the Caliph on earth. Their every step was attended by servants, their every word was law to those beneath them, and their hands were sought by the most powerful men in the realm. From a distance, they were the most privileged women alive, living within a beautiful, gilded cage. But we must be clear, it was, in every sense of the word, a cage. Behind the intricate latticework and mother-of-pearl inlays, a cold, brutal reality existed. An Ottoman princess was not a person. She was an asset. She was a political tool, a living seal used to stamp alliances, reward loyalty, and neutralize potential threats to the throne. Her value was not in her intellect, her kindness, or her dreams. Her value lay in her bloodline and, most importantly, in her womb. From the moment of her birth, her body was the property of the state, a coin in the empire's ever-expanding market of power. This was not a system born of casual cruelty, but of calculated political necessity. The Ottoman Empire was a sprawling, complex entity, constantly threatened by internal rebellions from powerful governors and external wars with rival empires. To maintain stability, the Sultan needed to ensure the absolute loyalty of his most powerful subjects, his pashas, his viziers, and his generals. And there was no surer way to bind a powerful man to the throne than to marry him to the Sultan's own flesh and blood. A princess's marriage was not a celebration of love. It was a transaction of power, a political chain wrapped in velvet and silk. And in the early 17th century, no princess was more valuable, and therefore more doomed to this fate, than the brilliant young daughter of Sultan Ahmed I. Her name was Fatma, and her story reveals the true, horrifying cost of being a woman born to power in the Ottoman world. Born in 1607 to the powerful Sultan Ahmed I and his formidable wife, Kosem Sultan, Princess Fatma was the embodiment of this gilded system. From her earliest moments, she lived a life of staggering privilege, a world almost entirely sealed off from the reality of the empire her family ruled. She was raised within the innermost sanctums of the Topkapi Palace's harem, a world within a world, governed by its own silent, unwritten laws and the constant watchful eyes of the eunuchs and serving women who orbited her. She was a jewel, polished and protected, her every need met before she could even voice it. But this protection was, in itself, a form of imprisonment. While she was educated by the finest tutors in the empire, her brilliance was not a gift to be nurtured for its own sake. It was an asset to be cultivated for the state. Fatma possessed a mind that far outshone her peers. She was a gifted linguist, fluent in the poetic nuances of Persian and the scholarly complexities of Arabic. She studied history, diplomacy, and statecraft, displaying an intelligence that, had she been born a man, might have one day allowed her to rule. She had a spirit, a spark of curiosity about the world beyond the palace walls, a world she could only glimpse through the latticed screens of her windows. Her mother, the powerful Princess Sultan, herself a former slave who had risen to become the most influential woman in Ottoman history, oversaw her daughter's education with meticulous care. She loved Fatma, but she was also a master of the imperial game. She understood that her daughter's brilliance, her beauty, and her royal blood made her an exceptionally valuable political tool. Every lesson in poetry, every hour spent mastering the harp, was not for Fatma's personal enrichment. It was all part of a long, calculated process of honing a perfect offering for the altar of imperial politics. For a princess of her standing, there was only one ultimate purpose, and as she blossomed into a young woman, the time was fast approaching for her to be prepared for it through a dark and terrifying ritual. As Fatma entered her teenage years, her formal education in languages and history was gradually replaced by a different, far more sinister curriculum. It was a process known in the secretive circles of the harem as terbiye ve mubera, the sacred education and purification. This was not education in any recognizable sense. It was a systematic and brutal form of psychological alchemy, a process designed to take a vibrant, intelligent young woman and methodically dismantle her soul, leaving behind only a beautiful, obedient instrument of the state. The architect of this transformation was a formidable woman named Gulnar Hatun, the chief instructress of the royal princesses. Gulnar was not a mere tutor. She was a sculptor of minds, a fanatical believer in the absolute supremacy of the dynasty. Under Gulnar's cold, watchful eye, Fatma's real education began. The lessons were held in stark, unadorned rooms, a deliberate contrast to the opulence of the rest of the palace. Here, Fatma was taught the first and most important principle of her existence, that she, as a person, did not matter. Her thoughts, her dreams, her fears, and her desires were not just irrelevant, they were a form of treason against the empire. She was taught a new vocabulary, one where words like love, happiness, and choice were replaced with duty, sacrifice, and dynastic glory. Day after day, she was forced to recite the histories of past princesses who had served the empire through strategic marriages, their personal suffering reframed as heroic sacrifice. It was a process of systematic erasure. Her spirit, once so curious and bright, was to be broken down and reshaped into something more useful, a perfect, unfeeling vessel of imperial will. Even her own mother, the powerful Princess Sultan, was forced to hand her daughter over to this system, watching from a distance as the girl she had raised was slowly turned into a stranger. They had captured her mind, erasing the princess she had been to make way for the political tool she had to become. But this was only the beginning. Once her spirit was shackled, the system would turn its cold, methodical attention to her body. Once her mind was a fortress of imperial duty, the system began its final, most intimate assault, the conditioning of her body. This phase of the terbiye ve mubera was designed to strip away the last vestiges of her personal autonomy and transform her physical form into an unfeeling instrument of the state. It began with posture. For hours each day, Fatma was forced to sit and stand in rigid, unnatural positions, sometimes with boards strapped to her back, to cultivate an unbreakable stillness. This was not about cultivating grace. It was endurance training, designed to teach her body to withstand immense discomfort without flinching, a skill she would desperately need. The true horror of this physical education, however, lay in the rehearsals. In the privacy of a guarded chamber, Gulnar Hatun would introduce a life-sized mannequin, anatomically detailed and designed for a single, grotesque purpose. With this silent, unfeeling partner, Fatma was forced to rehearse the physical mechanics of her wedding night, over and over again. The process was cold, clinical, and utterly dehumanizing. She was instructed on the precise angles of her body, the specific ways she must move, and the appropriate, silent responses she was to exhibit. Every session was a lesson in objectification. She was taught that her body was not her own, that its sensations were irrelevant, and that its only function was to perform a dynastic duty without error or emotion. Numbness was presented as a virtue, a necessary shield to protect the empire from the inconvenience of a princess's personal feelings. Day after day, she was forced to participate in this silent, horrifying pantomime, a ritual that stripped the most intimate of human acts of all warmth and connection, reducing it to a cold, mechanical procedure. By her 17th birthday, the process was complete. The vibrant, intelligent girl named Fatma was gone, replaced by a perfect, obedient imperial offering, her spirit broken and her body conditioned. She was now ready. The wedding was announced, and the groom, a powerful pasha chosen for his political utility, began his journey to the capital. The wedding of Princess Fatma to the powerful Kara Mustafa Pasha was the grandest spectacle Constantinople had seen in a generation. For a week, the city was a whirl of celebration. Lavish feasts were held, magnificent parades snaked through the streets, and gifts of unimaginable value were exchanged between the palace and the noble houses of the empire. To the public, it was a joyous affirmation of the dynasty's strength and generosity, a fairy tale union between a beloved princess and a heroic servant of the state. The air was filled with music and the cheers of the adoring masses, all celebrating a wedding they believed to be a romantic and glorious affair. But at the center of this whirlwind of pageantry was a hollow space of perfect, terrifying silence. Princess Fatma moved through the ceremonies like a beautiful, exquisitely dressed ghost. Her face, a flawless mask of serene indifference, revealed nothing of the storm of terror raging within her. She was the perfect product of her education. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. She inclined her head with perfect grace, and she spoke the scripted words of consent with a clear, steady voice. To the assembled dignitaries and foreign ambassadors, she was the picture of regal composure. They did not see the conditioned automaton beneath the silken veil. They only saw the power of the Ottoman dynasty embodied in its most beautiful daughter. This entire spectacle was not for her. It was for the men who controlled her. It was a theatre of power, where every ritual had a deeper political meaning. Her new husband, the Pasha, was not just gaining a wife. He was being shackled to the throne with a chain made of gold and royal blood. The elaborate ceremonies where he swore his undying loyalty were a public declaration that his power, his wealth, and his very life now belonged to the Sultan. The parades ended, the crowds dispersed, and the music faded into the night. Now the true purpose of the day was at hand. Flanked by silent eunuchs and her stoic instructress, Gulnar Hatun, Fatma was led away from the public world and towards the nuptial pavilion, a silent bride walking towards her final ordeal. The nuptial pavilion was not a simple bedchamber. It was a stage, meticulously designed for a sacrifice. It was a multi-leveled structure, draped in the finest silks and glittering with gold thread, yet its beauty felt cold and predatory. On the lower level, in the shadows, stood the witnesses. They were not voyeurs in the traditional sense. They were official verifiers, high-ranking imams and trusted viziers, the notaries of the flesh, whose sole purpose was to listen and later testify that the marriage had been consummated and the political contract sealed. Their presence transformed the most intimate of acts into a public, political transaction, and their silent, shadowy forms were a constant reminder to Fatma that this moment was not hers. As Fatma was led to the upper chamber, the last vestiges of her former self were stripped away. She was no longer a scholar, a musician, or a daughter. She was an imperial vessel, a body whose sole purpose was to fulfill a dynastic function. The moments that followed were documented not in official histories, but in the secret, horrified diaries of palace servants and the clinical reports of the witnesses. They did not record an act of love, but an ordeal, punctuated by 3 distinct screams that echoed through the pavilion. The first was a cry of pure, childlike terror, the sound of a girl confronted with a horrifying and inescapable reality. The second was a sharp, piercing scream of physical pain. But it was the third scream, they reported, that was the most chilling. It was not a sound of pain or fear, but of something else entirely. A hollow, desolate cry that seemed to come from a place beyond human feeling. It was the sound of a spirit shattering, the final, agonized death of the girl who had once dreamed of a world beyond the palace walls. The witnesses made their notes. The political requirement was fulfilled, and the Pasha had his royal bride. But the Princess Fatma, who had entered the pavilion that night, never came out. A ghost wearing her face did, and the silence that followed her final scream would last for the rest of her tragic, empty life. In the days and weeks that followed the wedding, a deafening silence fell around Princess Fatma. The screams had ceased, But what replaced them was something far more unnerving. She became a living ghost, a beautiful, silent doll drifting through the opulent halls of the palace. She refused to speak, not just to her new husband, but to anyone. Her ladies-in-waiting, who had once admired her quick wit, now only saw a vacant 1,000-yard stare. She would sit for hours, motionless, her eyes fixed on a tapestry or a pattern on the floor, completely lost in a world no one else could enter. The court physicians were summoned, their faces a mask of professional concern. After their examinations, they offered a clinical, yet chillingly evasive diagnosis: virginal melancholy. This was not a real medical condition. It was a courtly euphemism, a carefully constructed fiction designed to pathologize her trauma without ever acknowledging its brutal cause. It was a diagnosis that protected the system, not the victim. It implied that the fault lay within her delicate female constitution, not in the barbaric ritual she had been forced to endure. Her husband, Kara Mustafa Pasha, a powerful man of war and politics, was left with a wife who was a wife in name only. His prize, the symbol of his connection to the throne, was a broken shell. The alliance was legally sealed, but the woman at its center was psychologically shattered. The sacred education, the system designed to create a perfect, compliant imperial tool, had been too effective. In its quest to erase her spirit, it had destroyed the very asset it was meant to prepare. The official cause of death, when it came a few years later, was a wasting fever. But those who had witnessed her decline knew the truth. Princess Fatma had died on her wedding night. Her body simply took a few more years to follow her spirit into the grave. And the most horrifying part of this entire tragedy, she was not the only one. Princess Fatma's tragic fate was not an anomaly. It was the intended outcome of a brutal and efficient system. Her story, preserved in the archives only because of its dramatic conclusion, was a silent echo of the ordeals faced by countless other royal women. Her own sisters, Isa Sultan and Geverhan Sultan, were similarly married off to powerful men, their unions marked by the same cold political calculus. Geverhan, like Fatma, endured the torment of being a child bride, married at an age so young it shocks the modern mind. Isa Sultan was trapped in a loveless marriage for decades, a political necessity long after any pretense of partnership had faded. They were all cogs in the same imperial machine, their individual lives and happiness sacrificed for the stability of the throne. This pattern of cruelty was the very foundation of the Ottoman political marriage system. The princesses were not expected to be partners, but symbols. Their suffering was not a bug in the system. It was a feature, a necessary component of the absolute submission required of the powerful men who married them. But to assume these women were all passive victims is to underestimate the strength of the human spirit. While open rebellion was impossible, many princesses waged their own silent, desperate wars of resistance. Historical records are filled with accounts of princesses who, after enduring the initial ordeal of their wedding nights, simply refused to speak to their husbands ever again. This was not a childish sulk. It was a profound act of defiance, the only weapon they had left. By denying their husbands the intimacy of conversation, they were refusing to complete their own subjugation. They performed their public duties with perfect grace, but in private, they created a fortress of silence that no command could penetrate. These small, forgotten rebellions, these silent wars waged within gilded cages, were a testament to their enduring will. But in an empire that controlled history itself, how were these stories remembered? And what deeper truth do they tell us about the real foundation of imperial power? The story of Princess Fatma and the other women of the Ottoman dynasty is a chilling reminder that the grandest empires are often built upon the most intimate of sacrifices. The golden facade of the Topkapi Palace, with its magnificent halls and soaring minarets, was also a prison, a gilded cage where the spirits of royal women were systematically broken to serve the ambitions of men. For centuries, their stories were deliberately censored, dismissed as private tragedies, or erased from the official histories which were written to celebrate the glory of the sultans. Not the suffering of their daughters, but these were not private matters. The forced marriages, the psychological conditioning, and the ritualized ordeals were foundational acts of statecraft. The strength of the Ottoman Empire, its ability to control powerful men and maintain a vast, complex political structure, was paid for with the silent terror of its princesses. Their bodies were the currency of power, and their broken hearts were the mortar that held the empire together. When we pull back the curtain on these forgotten histories, we are forced to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the foundations of what we call civilization are often laid with stones of incredible cruelty. The story of Princess Fatma is not just a tragedy from a distant past. It is a testament to the human cost of absolute power and a tribute to the silent, forgotten acts of resistance from women who were denied a voice. Their screams may have been silenced by palace walls and censored by history, but if we listen closely, we can still hear their echoes. What other hidden stories of powerful women do you think history has tried to erase? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these forgotten chapters deserve to be remembered, please subscribe for more journeys into the dark truths of our shared past.